As she mentioned, I am the Assistant Director of Admissions here at Claremont Graduate University. I represent our School of Arts and Humanities, and I'm joined by my co-host, Marcus Weekly. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marcus Weekly. It's been mentioned a few times. I'm the Director of the Center for Writing and Rhetoric at Claremont Graduate University, and also an alum. So I'm happy to see you all here, and I'm excited to talk about personal statements with you today.
I suppose it should be mentioned I'm also an alum of CGU here, so perhaps we could speak to some student experiences, and by default, at some point, Marcus and I have submitted successful statements. So we'll go ahead and talk through our statement of purpose workshop tonight, give you some good pointers and some good advice here moving forward. Just as a brief outline for tonight's session, we will talk about different types of personal statements. We'll run through some examples. We'll give you some sample prompts of what you might see on a prompt, depending on what program or university you're applying to. We'll also talk about some things to keep in mind before drafting your personal statement or your statement of purpose. We'll give you some tips for drafting and how to navigate that, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. As a point, I will say that we will cover a few questions tonight, but for those of you who are local, we're really excited to be adding on a session for Saturday's programming on November 6th. We're going to have an in-person writing workshop where the goal is to actually have you leave that session with a draft of your statement of purpose. So we're really excited for that. We'll tackle your questions tonight and hopefully get you all started on your drafts. So let's talk about types of personal statements and what you might expect to see on the list of requirements for an application to graduate school. Few main types of personal statements, the first of which is just a personal statement, which will ideally cover a few things about yourself when you're applying to a grad program. Who are you? What are your values? What has your path been to this point? And why this particular program? You know, what about a given program that you're applying to has drawn you to apply to it, whether it be the coursework, the research that the faculty are engaged in, or the career outcomes of alumni of that program. Essentially, a personal statement is an essay that describes who you are as a candidate for the program as much as who you are as an individual and why you're choosing to seek out a particular degree, whether it be a master's degree or a PhD. For those of you seeking out a PhD, and especially some MA programs as well, you may be asked to submit a statement of purpose. Now, I've seen some admissions requirements that sort of use these terms interchangeably, statement of purpose, personal statement. They can be used interchangeably, but I think there are some important differences in a statement of purpose that are key to note. So for a statement of purpose, I think there can be an element of that essay that includes a personal statement, answering the questions of who you are, what your values are, and why you're pursuing a specific program. But generally speaking, the statement of purpose is going to be a little bit more directed at what your purpose for pursuing the degree is, usually related to what research you're going to be pursuing. So one thing that a statement of purpose will also answer is the significance of pursuing that degree to you. Not only why are you pursuing it, but what is important about you obtaining this degree for your future career or research goals. What resources does that program offer that you plan to utilize to be successful? Another question you should be thinking about when thinking about the differences between a personal statement and a statement of purpose. And again, with a statement of purpose, generally more specific to specific faculty members at an institution that you'll be applying to. So which faculty members are you looking to partner with, maybe to publish or co-publish research as part of your PhD or master's degree? What are you looking for in terms of who you want to partner with for specific research opportunities? Likely as an MA or a PhD student, you'll be working very closely with one, perhaps two different faculty members. So in a statement of purpose, it's very important to communicate that and make sure that they understand who you're applying to be working with. The statement of purpose gives you a bit of an opportunity to be a bit more specific about why you're applying to a specific program. And it really is an exercise in persuasive writing, trying to provide a good example to the faculty of who you are as a candidate and why you would be successful in a particular graduate program. Again, that final bullet point there, how do you plan to use this degree career-wise? How are you looking to pursue a new career, maybe launch into a new career path, or augment your current career by pursuing this MA or PhD degree? These are all questions and considerations that you should be keeping in mind when thinking about a statement of purpose. Again, identifying why you want to pursue a specific program and what your intent is for pursuing that specific degree. Few other different types that could differ based on what sort of program you're looking for. A research statement is, I would say, an even more specific version of a statement of purpose. Oftentimes, you'll be outlining a plan of research. So if you have maybe the formulation of a doctoral dissertation already in mind, you can start putting out your plan of research, maybe a literature review you've already done. Those are things that may need to be included in a research statement as well. And then an artist statement, if you're looking for a more fine arts program, usually a little bit shorter, but something to define your goals as an artist and what you're seeking to gain out of any particular program. You can feel free to jump in at any point, Marcus, if you feel like I've missed anything on those personal statements or statement of purpose, but I'll keep chugging along. I wanted to provide some examples to you here, just some example prompts of what you might see. I've pulled some prompts here from different applications we have here at Claremont Graduate University. Starting at the top there with, please submit a 1,000-word statement of purpose that details your academic and or professional achievements, your specific areas of interest within your desired field of study, and why you are a strong candidate for graduate studies at CGU. Also tacking on the career goals on there at the end. You'll see a little bit of a different version of that prompt really just below it there listed on number 2. And I think what's important to mention at this stage is perhaps what we've said a few different times at our fall open house event today. It's really important to connect with your personal admissions representative for any given program that you're applying to, as the prompt that's listed on the website, such as these here, may give a very good overview of what you should aim to include in your statement of purpose, but your personal admissions representative will be able to provide some better details and examples of things you should most focus on when writing and drafting your statement of purpose or personal statement. The main things and items you can see in these 2 prompts realistically is, again, you should be including a little bit about who you are as a person, but you also should be defining why you're seeking out this specific program, what your goals for research, and or, of course, what your ultimate career goals would be moving through that program. I've also included a little bit more specific of a prompt, specifically from our teacher education school here at CGU. So you can see something that's a bit more specific in what it wants and a little bit more outlined in terms of providing a layout, what you should do in terms of spacing and 12-point font. And then again, it's much more outlined in the sense that it has 3 very specific points and questions that you should address in the statement. Generally speaking, when I'm working with students who are writing sample or writing statements of purpose, if it asks for maybe 2 to 3 pages or maybe a word count or anything like that, as 2 of these prompts do, definitely a good idea to think about how you want to structure that in terms of length. So if there are maybe 3 sections of a statement of purpose and you have 3 pages to elaborate on those points, good idea to try to at least start as an outline, hitting each of those points in about a page. That way you have a nice statement that flows from introduction to conclusion. You can tie all loose ends up and make sure that you cover all elements of the prompt. Things to keep in mind before you draft your statement of purpose. Of course, we just went through some sample prompts, so it is important to keep in mind and ask yourself, is there a prompt? As I mentioned, good idea to connect with an admissions representative and see if you can pull out any additional information from a prompt or from the department that they look for in a particular statement of purpose. Some programs will be asking for both a personal statement and a statement of purpose or statement of intent. So it's really important to read the directions and make sure you understand exactly what a program or application is asking for. These are all really important things to keep in mind before you start writing. The last thing you want to do is to write a 3-page excellent essay and realize that you missed an entire question and now you have to cut out your precious writing and figure out how to fit it all into 3 pages. On that point, make sure you're staying within any word or page limits. Most of the time, if you have a 2 to 3 page limit for a statement of purpose, I think if you spill a little bit onto a 4th, you're going to be fine. But if the prompt asks for 3 pages, I would shy away from submitting anything above 4 to 5, maybe going towards 6 or 7 pages. Want to make sure you stay within the word count and the page limit. Obviously signifies that you can follow directions well, but it's also really important to develop good skills as a concise writer in graduate school. Another question to keep in mind, are you applying via a centralized application or one unique to that program? That'll help you think about how you want to draft specific elements of your statement. And then, of course, the question you should ask yourself on a statement, and really for any piece of academic writing, when you get into graduate school, you will learn this pretty acutely. Who's your audience? So in this case, for your graduate application, this is likely going to be the faculty members for a given program. So when you are writing your statement, you can keep in mind that the chair or the faculty of any given program you're applying to are the ones that are going to be reading that statement. As I mentioned before, this is an exercise in academic as well as persuasive writing. So keeping your audience in mind for any piece of writing is important, but I would say particularly so for the statement of purpose.
Recording in progress.
I'll go ahead and pass it over to Marcus to run through some tips for drafting. And I've shared, of course, a little bit about the admissions side of things when thinking about statements of purpose. And I think Marcus has a lot to offer when it comes to the writing perspective here.
Thanks, Sean. I think you covered a number of great points, especially about audience and structure and how to respond to the prompts, and an important distinction between personal statements and the statement of intent. Sometimes there's a hybrid version of the two. Sometimes you're required to do both. I think I'm going to talk about both of them separately, but with the thought that based upon the prompt that you're responding to or what you want to convey, you can kind of take the advice that I'm going to provide and apply it to your specific situation. So, writing something is often a challenge, right? Almost anything to really convey what you want to say. And when you're approaching a genre like a personal statement that is so loaded, right? So the stakes are high in the first case. You usually really want the end goal of what you're applying for. And a lot of the time, even with detailed prompts, you have an idea of what you think it should look like, maybe from your undergrad personal statement or from examples you've seen. But you're just not sure how to take your own ideas and transfer those into this challenging genre. For the most part, you have a limited word count, so you're required to be concise. A lot of the time you're asked to do this extremely challenging, I was going to say semi-ridiculous, like balancing act of like, be vulnerable, be honest, tell us about yourself, but at the same time, be really detailed about all these specific things that you want future with this specific program, right? You got to do this balance. So you're being asked to be creative, but at the same time, you're asked to be, logical, to be precise, and to really have some key points that relate really clearly to your audience. So whenever you're trying to balance such diverse sets of demands, especially in a high stakes writing situation, you have every reason to feel stressed and challenged heading into that writing process. So one of the big takeaways I have given that situation is to try to get you to get out of that as much as you can for at least some of the writing process. Okay, so familiarize yourself with the prompt, familiarize yourself with what's expected of you, and then give yourself time to forget about that, to try to generate some content for your personal statement that is that sets you up to be a bit more genuine, a bit more yourself, to connect with the deeper kind of real reasons why you are interested in what you're interested in enough to pursue a degree, and then where you actually see yourself going with that degree. Because that sort of thinking about yourself is something that you probably do often. You just don't necessarily do it in this context in a way where you're asked to then express it in writing in such a concise genre, right? So when it comes to drafting, you want to give yourself the space to be creative, right? And therefore maybe messy in a certain respect. There are a few ways you can do this. One is something that's often called like a brain dump, right? You just spend some time getting down as many ideas you can about some of the prompt questions that you can think of, right? And you try not to stop for a certain period of time. You just let the ideas flow. And you use the writing process as a generative exercise. So what that means is that you enter into kind of, your brain starts to function slightly differently. by writing, where ideas flow one after another. And that process of writing creates a certain different type of thinking that generates ideas you wouldn't have if you weren't writing. So it's using writing as kind of like a creative activity, but you're doing it within the confines of this writing genre. So that means, let's say, like returning to one of the prompts, you know, why are you choosing this school or this program? Or why do you want to pursue study of X discipline? You spend some time just writing every idea you can that comes to you. You just more or less creating a cache, right, of material that then you can input and put into a final product. And you do that for the different prompts, right, just to generate ideas as like a brainstorming activity. Something else that I find really helpful is to do the same thing conversationally. And sometimes it's helpful to do with people that know you really well, that have been with you along this path, and they might have some insight because they've been along the way with you as to why you're making a decision to take this next step. And equally helpful sometimes are people that really don't know that much about you, but they're inquisitive enough to have a certain back and forth conversation with you, to ask certain prompting questions. And you know, when we have a program in support of Fulbright scholarships that I run, and there's the personal statement's a really key element of a Fulbright application. And you know, I recommend that when you have this conversation, if you do have this type of conversation, to record yourself doing it. And that's because sometimes you'll say things in a certain way in conversation when you're forced to because of the circumstance or the other pressures of having a back and forth like that, that you wouldn't say otherwise, and you might lose it. You might not be able to get it back in the exact same way. So to actually record that conversation in case it does turn out really, really good, and you did go somewhere with it and you have some ideas there. You know, these sorts of pre-writing activities are more on the creative side, you know, because again, with that balance, you submit an entire application. And that application is going to, you know, include a lot of facts about you. And the personal statement, a lot of the time, unless it's the prompts really narrow it just to your research connection to the program you're applying to. If they are, you know, a hybrid personal version or a personal statement itself, it's one of the rare, if not the only opportunity on the application to express yourself, to represent, to show the reader, the committee, who you are apart from those numbers. So in some way, you want to write the personal statement that no one else could write. And that's because if done in a way that is honest and vulnerable, right? And that does show the real you apart from the numbers and the other things you submitted on the application, the reader will not only get to know you through reading it, and therefore probably make it a little harder for them to not accept you because they'll feel a genuine human connection there. But you know, it also will accomplish, you know, a few goals there. It folds back in or ties in the motivations, the reasons behind why you're applying to the degree that you're applying to in a way that's not forced or cliche, as you know, one of the big pieces of advice of not to do for a personal statement. So you want to get yourself in this space to forget about the confines, forget about the high stakes writing for a bit, and give yourself some time to generate ideas and to get some flow going. And maybe to remember some of the key moments that you can include on a personal statement in a way that feels natural. Things really about yourself, you know, that can create a good hook that doesn't come across as cliche. To really remember a reason why you decided, yes, I do want to study psychology more, or I do want to pursue, you know, an MFA, right? And those sorts of moments, if you're trying to appear a certain way, or you're trying to meet the demands of the genre, by saying, oh, I need to like show myself as being super credible or as super qualified. I'm going to try to choose this or that experience or this idea that I have, or those sorts of things end up oftentimes feeling a bit contrived. And if you think of your audience, they encounter, as Sean mentioned, so many of these applications and read through so many of the essays. You want to do everything you can to come across as genuine as you can. And by doing that, you want to try to get out a bit of the stress of the genre as much as you can, generate some ideas, and then move to the other sorts of pre-writing that we have on here. Things like outlining, right? Are a different version of starting with bullet points to get an idea of a flow going, like an altered version of an outline. That is how you're going to balance the structural elements, the requirements of this challenging genre with the more creative ones, right? And so when you're asked to do this sort of dance, I highly recommend, taking time for both as much as you can. You're going to generate content. You're going to try to get some creative ideas. You're going to, give yourself time to really pick and choose some key experiences or scenarios, just one or two at most, that can really represent, your pursuit of the specific degree, and then also taking the time to then work and craft that into a flowing prompt meeting, and other structurally and grammatically sound a personal statement. So here are some other important points. And for the do's, the starting early, the revising, having multiple and different readers, all of those sorts of things are absolutely essential to this. I mean, for most writing, unfortunately, we don't always have the opportunity to do it. But in this case, if at all possible, let a draft sit, if you can, for a day or more, a couple days, and then go back to it with fresh eyes and see how it looks again and what changes you can make. Even if you can only do that for an hour, that's better than not doing it at all. Another thing to do, having multiple and different readers, of course, having different folks read it and to give you feedback. You also want to attempt to read from the standpoint of your audience, if at all possible. So that means, okay, I am, the faculty committee reading this personal statement, and you do your best to read it through that eyes and make changes and revise it, given that very specific audience that you're writing for. And you're only really able to go through those sorts of revision processes if you do give yourself some time to do that. And a related but slightly different, those sorts of revisions are those are broader. Those are structural. They have to do with the flow of ideas and the ideas you do decide to include or not. There's a different thing that's closer to editing, right? Or that is editing, where you go through and you just make sure that, the grammar, the spelling, the formatting, all of those sorts of things are correct. So typically I recommend that happens last. Because through the revision process, you might also do editing along the way that you'll end up cutting out, and that is actually time wasted at that point. So some of us are perfectionists. I have a challenge leaving things unedited as I go along. It's really hard for me to not edit along the way. But if at all possible, I mean, it's often helpful to revise the higher order concerns, as they're often called, and then the lower order, the grammatical ones. In a document like this are really important still, but that's typically something you can leave for the final draft. Here under don'ts, I think some of the key takeaways are, that kind of recycling idea that might have been taught to you in doing an undergraduate personal statement, where you either want to do things chronologically or start with kind of a generic hook of sorts. And that's where the processes that I was talking about before, about trying to get you to connect with thinking the way you think about yourself a bit more naturally, and trying to get that down as much as you can, will help you avoid this don't, where you come across contrived. Also, because you're applying to graduate school, it's different. It's a different context than applying to undergrad as well. So even on the more personal side of these statements, you don't want to go back to childhood. You typically want to stay more recent, within the last few years, or back to your undergrad. If there's some distance there, you can go back to the undergrad if the undergrad's recent, about your recent college experience. You don't want to go too far back. Different than the undergrad, again, even once you've generated this kind of personal side, you do need to make those really direct connections between, I want to pursue the program at CGU because I'm interested in studying X, and there are professors Y and Z that I'm looking to work with. It's a clearer connection between past, where I am now and why I'm applying, and then where I want to go in the future, right? And there's an element of presenting that narrative in the personal statement for graduate school that typically isn't present in the undergrad. So you don't have as much time usually to talk about yourself in a way that is going to really represent the real you, apart from how that then coincides to your reasons for applying, and then your reasons for taking that degree and moving forward in your career and in your life in some sort of way. So stay away from the sort of cliche things, any kind of templatized version of this. Let the prompts guide you in terms of topics, as Sean mentioned. If you're concerned about the flow of ideas, you can kind of respond with the order of the prompts. Or you can take just a more narrative version where you start with some sort of attention grabbing hook, but again, like a genuine type, and then flowing through the prompts in a way that feels like telling a story. And that sort of refinement occurs typically over drafts. That's not something that we produce right off the bat. Hit 1,000 words and we're done. Typically the first draft will be 1,500 words, that sort of thing, and then you revise it down to the key ideas. And finally, rely on your grades to get you in. This is the opportunity to represent to the real you outside of your grades. And you shouldn't pass up that opportunity. This is an essential part of the application along those lines.
Just to echo a few points there as well regarding some do's and don'ts for having multiple and different readers. If you're currently enrolled in an undergraduate program and you're thinking about moving into an MA or PhD, perhaps for next fall, I'm sure there are some professors that you can, really, or maybe you enjoyed a specific professor in a class. They will often be very happy to read statements and go through things with you. If not, our admissions representatives here at CGU are always more than happy to read statements and work through things for you. I've read a lot of statements for applications that I've worked in my capacity here at CGU, and I'm always more than happy to read through and provide feedback there. So there's always someone available to read, especially here at CGU, to read through your statement, give you some feedback. And again, not just, copy editing, proofreading feedback, changing grammar or commas here and there, but really getting to the substance and the content of what you want to hit. Speaking a bit more on tailoring your essay to the institution or program, this is always just, in terms of speaking on editing and copy editing, it's very good to go back and read everything before you finally hit submit. I have seen a few unfortunate circumstances where students have submitted statements to CGU that were not meant for CGU and they were meant for other universities. So you can sort of work on a templatized or, a statement that you might tailor to a couple different programs. But if you're going to do that, definitely make sure that you've got the right name of the university or faculty member in your statement, which again begs the point here, best to really fine tune and write an individual essay for each program you're applying to. It's only going to benefit you in the long run. And then on that, relying on your grades to get you in as well. This is the best opportunity, again, to show the faculty and the committee who are reading your application, who you are as a writer and who you are as a potential academic. And oftentimes I've seen the statement of purpose is that one piece of the application that is most in your control. Of course, you've enrolled in several programs, you have your grades, your resume, and your things that are a part, letters for you in your application, but it behooves you to pay attention to this one element that you control more than anything else, and to devote yourself to it, take a lot of time. Just as a personal anecdote, Marcus shared some great advice with me when I was a student here at CGU, that whole leave it alone for 24 hours. That can almost serve as a second reader in some ways. When you write a piece of writing and you leave it alone for 24 hours and don't think about it, think about something else for an entire day and then come back to it, you really do get a fresh perspective and a fresh set of eyes. And that's really helped in my own editing process. And I know it can be really helpful for everyone here tonight. So definitely pay attention to these do's and don'ts. There's a lot of very fine elements of a statement you have to pay attention to, but hopefully we've provided some good advice to sort of alleviate the pressures while also, giving you some good tips on how to move forward with this unique sort of piece of writing. One last tip I will say here before opening it up to some discussion, potentially some questions. I have seen some great statements that have done really well to align themselves with a particular university's goal. So good opportunity to meet with a personal admissions representative and see what the mission of the department or the university is that you're applying to. Tying yourself to that mission, to that goal relatively early in your statement is a good way to not only indicate you've done your research on the institution, but to best align yourself with the program that you're applying to. Those are the tips and things that we can share with you this evening on our statement of purpose. At this point, we do want to open it up to some questions. I'll say a few things here that you can, open some questions up in the chat, or we can get to them if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself. If you do think of some questions later, or if you'd like to connect with me and have me read through a draft of your statement. I've read drafts the very earliest stages, literally nothing but bullet points. And then I've read, of course, some polished drafts that are ready for submission. So if you'd like me to read through it, I'd be happy to do so. You can send it to my email right there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, again, from the admissions side of things when it comes to a good statement of purpose. But I will also put my information in the chat in a moment, but I'll go ahead and stop the screen share. Thanks, Marcus, for joining us this evening. It was really great to present with you. I'm really happy that you could be here, and thanks everyone else here for joining. But we will open it up to questions. So feel free to drop in the chat or unmute yourself if you have a question.
I'm actually going to start because there was a question in the chat. You did answer it, but just so it can be reiterated, there was a question from Jamie, and they had two questions actually. So one, who will be reviewing our statements, the admissions office or the program faculty/professors? And then their second question is it necessary to mention a specific faculty member I'm interested in if applying to an MA program?
Good questions. So the faculty for each individual program will very likely be reading your application, either the chair or a committee of faculty members from each program. It does vary by program, but that is generally the case. And then as an MA student, again, not to use the same exact answer, it does depend on the program. Some programs allow opportunities for MA students to work much closer with faculty members. Generally speaking, PhD students are the ones who are working very close to faculty doing research or co-publishing or anything of that nature. But if you're interested in a very specific area of a field in any research or area discipline you're applying to, definitely not a bad idea. As a personal anecdote, I am an alum of the History and Archival Studies program here at CGU, and I was really interested in the Spanish Civil War. And even as a master's student, I wrote in my statement that I was very interested in the research of Dr. Joshua Good, one of our history and cultural studies professors here at CGU. So even as a master's student, I definitely think you can. Whether or not you need to, I think is the additional question there. I don't think it's as necessary perhaps, but never a bad idea. Again, to indicate that you've done your research and have found the right fit for your goals. I see another question here in the chat. How technical should our tone be? Should we focus more on knowledge of undergrad material and research versus telling our personal stories? Marcus, do you want to maybe tackle that a little bit, and then I could share some thoughts as well?
Yeah, I think I would let the prompt guide you first or foremost in terms of what kind of frame are the balance of those different themes, right? you can get a lot of information there. And if it's open, you're going to look to do something, a good mix in between. If there is no prompt and you're kind of on your own, which I don't know how often that happens, then you would probably want to do your best for graduate school to balance the two. But you do want the prompt to guide you, as the examples kind of showed. Some, the teacher education, for example, are asking the sorts of questions where, what about your life experiences have led you to want to be a teacher, right? That's asking you very much to connect to your personal life, bringing it into your application now. And I think most will give some space to that, but the prompt will help guide you as to how much. Nonetheless, with the graduate personal statement, you want, those kind of personal scenarios that represent the real you to be connected to, what you're going to study. It's not as open as the undergrad, where it's just tell us about yourself, more or less, in many cases. In this, it's tell us about yourself as to why you want to pursue a graduate degree. So it's slightly different. In terms of the tone, again, put yourself in the mind of your audience, right? And your audience is going to be most likely a faculty committee reading through a set of personal statements. So you can make, kind of personal decisions there, though I would advise against not getting too technical, apart from maybe some of the places where you want to talk about specific research interests and possibly with specific faculty and how that might transfer into future career. On a whole, even for graduate applications, personal statements are not a highly technical genre, right? Like they're looking for a bit more of a story, like a narrative storytelling personal feel to it, though not in a dumbed down way. So again, you've got kind of like a certain balance going there. But unless they're explicitly asking for something closer to a research statement, I wouldn't advise to get hyper technical because you probably run the risk of, sounding like you're just trying to show off how much you know. And remember, this is supposed to be, a balance in some respects, because these faculty are admitting you to a program as a person as well. What kind of academic you are has, partly to do with what type of person you are and what kind of student, all of that. So if you do have this kind of singular opportunity a lot of the time to represent yourself as a person, you want to think about that from the audience perspective, and that will probably in most cases shy you away from being overly technical, especially throughout the entire statement. Do you have any thoughts on that, Sean? Or?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that there's some differences here between programs. And again, if you're going for a specific, like if you're pursuing like a PhD in mathematics or something, might be a good idea to demonstrate your content knowledge in that area. But for some programs, you can probably, again, it's more appropriate to address that narrative and tell more of, maybe one life experience that led you to this area, while also getting into your statement of, your research and what you want to get into. On that quick topic too, just another, I guess, cliche that I've run across in terms of an additional tip when thinking about the audience and who's going to be reviewing it, as it is more of like a statement of purpose. It's, an idea of what you want to get involved in research. I haven't read a lot of statements that read like a letter, that say, "Dear faculty committee," and then end with "Sincerely," insert an applicant name here. I don't think that's entirely necessary. So if you want to address it as a letter, or put it that way, feel free to, but I don't think it's necessary. I think a more concise statement of purpose that has a strong hook and introduction with solid body paragraphs that define what your research or interests are for a particular program, and then a strong conclusion. I think that often communicates across an application committee a bit better, at least in my own experience there. So I see some other questions in the chat here, so I'll just keep moving around. Should we mention age, work experience, etc.? I think it depends a little bit here. Keep in mind that your resume will likely include a lot of your work experience. So if there's notable work experience that ties directly into your purpose for pursuing a specific degree, you can certainly elaborate on it a bit in the statement. And if you think your age is important, or it certainly wouldn't be, but if you think it's detrimental to your application for any reason, I suppose you can choose to include it, but I think it's ultimately up to you on that one. Again, for most of your contact information and some personal information will be in the application. So unless you have a good reason to include it for wanting to, convey a specific argument about who you are as a person, why you're a good fit for this program, I think, you certainly should. Another good question here, would one want to note their disability? Again, part of this statement is a personal statement. So I think you should certainly include things that define your life and have either made things, potentially challenging or have led you to view life in a different way that make you a unique individual. Part of that, I think, goes to Marcus's advice on how to come across as genuine in a statement. And I think that would be certainly something to mention there, perhaps if you agree there, Marcus.
Yeah, I think you want to, exactly what you said. If it fits in and you feel like there's no reason not to, definitely. If you feel like it fits into the statement that you're crafting.
Feel free, everyone, if you want to keep dropping questions in the chat. I did want to echo another piece of advice that Marcus shared a little bit earlier that was always really helpful with me. I've heard it called a few different things. Marcus referred to it as brain dump. I've heard other people call it stream of conscious. I had a writing consultant that called it zero drafting for me. I really liked this idea of a zero draft, something that kind of comes before even your first draft. That always really helped me get just a lot of ideas down on paper. And for those of us, myself especially included, who are prone to procrastination, it's a really easy way to get yourself started on something. And just like, what, I'm not going to worry myself with perfection and just try to produce this amazing document that's going to change the world. I'm just going to put the pen to paper or the fingers on the keyboard and just start writing. And ultimately, I found that zero drafting for maybe an hour or two, just getting all of your thoughts down and then coming back after 24 hours, you have sort of created for yourself a pretty nice outline. And you'll be able to see where you can cut things that don't make sense or any jargon you don't need, and then really start to, tune your narrative to what you'll submit.
Yeah, it's a nice name. Just the name itself takes the pressure off because you don't even feel like you're writing a first draft.
I've got a question here that I received, so I'll read it out loud here and then maybe we can tackle this, Marcus. So I wanted to ask what your thoughts are on using play on words in our statement of purpose, not for the whole paper, but maybe in your introduction or as a hook. For example, I'm interested in applying for a research program, so using words like fit, it's the goodness of fit. For that question, I absolutely will be reading statements. So I'll put my email in the chat once again here so y'all can send me drafts. I love reading statements of purpose. I spent not enough time on mine, even though it was successful, and I'm now paying it back by helping everyone and applicants get their best statements ready and forward. Play on words in terms of getting creative. It's easy to fall into cliche there, I think, depending on what you're looking for. Maybe Marcus can speak to that a bit more, but it's a tricky area. So I tread carefully. I think that might be my advice. And that would be a good, depending on your play of words that you're going for, that would be a great opportunity to reach out for someone to get some consultation.
Yeah, I'll just echo exactly what Sean said there. I think my thoughts are aligned exactly. And that would probably be a great place to have that outside reader, especially so, as you just mentioned, right? To see if even after you've read it as the audience and you feel like it's working the way that you want it to have someone else read it to see how it lands with them. Yeah, I would highly recommend to do that. Yeah.
So we're getting some more questions in the chat, but I did want to push everyone's attention to some more events that we're going to be having for Fall Open House tomorrow, one of which is going to be our How to Utilize CGU Resources coffee chat. As was mentioned, Marcus here is the director for the Center of Writing and Rhetoric. And he and some employees in the CWR, writing consultants, do a lot of work with our current students, fine-tuning drafts of seminar papers, papers for class, and even, as Marcus mentioned, maybe even Fulbright applications, really any piece of writing. So we're going to have a couple of those writing consultants virtually available tomorrow from 10 to 11:30 Pacific time. It'll be a great chance to, sort of meet with them and get their idea of how they work with Center for Writing and Rhetoric and how they provide those services to students. But in the time for right now, Marcus, do you just want to share a little bit more about Center for Writing and Rhetoric from your perspective as a director?
Yeah, I would love to. We see ourselves as a inter and co-curricular learning hub, learning community on campus. Our programming stretches from the time you start, or in this case, before some of you have even applied to CGU, all the way until you're finishing up your dissertation, or your thesis or any other kind of final project. We have consultations, as Sean mentioned, so in person, online, via email. We have events of all different sorts: dissertation boot camps, qualifying exam preparation weekends, writing retreats, drop-in writing sessions, just to be like productive spaces, students of color writing retreats. We offer a wide range of webinars on key writing topics, presenting topics. We facilitate the Big Pitch, which is CGU's 3-minute thesis competition. It's done at over 700 universities worldwide. It's a 3-minute single slide competition. There's some great, the winner gets $1,000. There's some great prizes, but also develop some incredible presentation skills. And the final event is really fun. You hear about research from across the university. So we also, do a lot with presenting and presentations through the Big Pitch and otherwise. And yeah, we also support student grant writing too. So we're part of the Student Grant Initiative and have a lot of programming around the Fulbright, but also just support any grant you want to apply to at any stage. So through coursework, through final projects, travel grants, those sorts of things. We support all of that as well. So, it's a multifaceted center in terms of, probably communication more broadly, both written and oral, the different forms it takes in the academic and professional degrees at CGU. So it's not the sort of place you just go to, when you're in trouble. It's this sort of place that, we can support you in whatever your academic or professional goals are, from when you first begin until, we even help folks format their dissertation. So until the very, very end. And as an alum, you have access to the center. We have some alum that make appointments every week. So you can visit the center your entire life after that.
It really is a fantastic resource, one that you certainly will utilize well in graduate school, given that no matter what program you're pursuing, you definitely will be producing a lot of writing. One thing I really enjoyed using the Center for Writing and Rhetoric was the opportunity to get eyes on my work that was not from the history department. So, people outside of my discipline who maybe weren't trained in history or even the humanities, who could come in with a totally fresh perspective, that I found that extremely helpful. Sometimes in graduate school, you get caught using jargon a lot because who's going to be reading this seminar paper and you just read all the same books that they've presented on. So, but it's when you want to produce a good piece of academic writing, you want it to be accessible too. So I always found it really helpful to get consultations from cultural studies and humanities students, but also students from different disciplines as well. I did have another question that came here in the chat regarding who you can send your statement of purpose to, regarding reaching out to those who are supplying letters of recommendation. I think that's a good idea for two reasons. Number one, even without asking, you may get a free consultation. They may provide some feedback on your statement. Also, as an indication of, and sort of in addition to your resume and CV, it'll give the recommender a good idea of what sort of program and what university you're applying to. And even a quick skim through that may be able to help them write a more effective letter. So depending on who your recommenders are, if you have a good relationship with them or an open working relationship that you've maintained, definitely a good idea. If it's an undergrad professor you haven't spoken to in 5 to 10 years, and you're dropping a 3-page writing piece and a resume and a long email about how you're getting into a program, I'd approach that with a little bit more tact. But I think it's definitely worth it to send over a statement to your recommenders. Andrea also mentioned it in the chat. If you are local, we will be having a statement of purpose writing workshop on Saturday here on campus in Claremont. This is a really great opportunity to take some of the key points and advice we've discussed here and to actually put them into practice. We'll do a quick write. We'll have some zero drafting down. And again, our goal here is to really have you leave this session with a bit of a piece of writing produced, whether that be the first page of your statement. If you work hard at it, maybe even the first draft or zero draft of your statement of purpose, ready and complete to get started, editing and working on for your CGU application. So if you're local, we'd certainly love to see you there Saturday. And then of course, we do have our additional programs tomorrow. We'll be having our coffee chat on how to utilize CGU resources with some offices across the university, including the Center for Writing and Rhetoric. And then we'll also be having our student experience panel. So we'll be having some current students from a variety of our programs come together. That will be moderated by one of our student support specialists from the Office of Student Engagement. And in that session, you'll learn a little bit about all the experiences you can have here at CGU as a student, both on the academic, professional, and on the personal side. So we're really looking forward to sharing these programs with you. I did want to take this opportunity again to thank everyone here for joining us in this session. I really enjoyed sharing this information with you. And thank you so much to Marcus Weekly, Director for the Center for Writing and Rhetoric, for joining us and sharing some excellent feedback and tips on how to approach a statement from a writing perspective. So thanks so much, Marcus. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
We are just about at the end. So at this point, I'll stay behind for a few minutes if anyone has some last minute questions about their statements or maybe even fall open house. But thank you so much again for joining us. I'm really excited to see everyone here, and hopefully we'll see you at some other events for fall open house. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all again for joining us. There won't be any programming in here, but if you do have questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put them in the chat, and we are more than happy to help.
That was a neat trick, Andrea, jumping from one to the other in here twice.
There we go.
Today has been my day with tech. My computer